Ms. Mills, Ms. Nichols, do you have any questions about your rights that I read to you just a moment ago?
Another big update in a shocking case. Former high school biology teacher Maris Nichols, now sitting in front of a judge, now facing more than 24 charges, accused of sexually abusing multiple students at the school she worked at. She's accused of sending explicit videos and even filming explicit videos as well. We have new disturbing details from a grand jury indictment that just came down that now puts this accused bad teacher back behind bars. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Wow, yet another development, seems like a new one every single day this week, involving a case that just keeps getting more disturbing by the day. A former Douglas County, Georgia biology teacher, already accused of having sex with multiple students, sending explicit videos to students, and even filming it all, is now facing nearly 36 charges. A grand jury just handed down a 27-count indictment, and we have obtained the documents laying it all out in stunning detail of what prosecutors say Maris Nichols did to at least 7 students.
Ms. Mills, Ms. Nichols, because your attorney has indicated that you would like to waive the warrant, do you have any questions about the rights that I read to you just a moment ago?
Former Douglas County High School teacher Maris Nichols made her first court appearance since this indictment on Zoom today. And if you have been following this case, you know the allegations against Nichols were already some of the worst that we have seen in a while. And again, that is saying a lot because we cover cases involving teachers accused of sexual abuse a lot here on Law and Crime. It's a really important topic. It matters a lot to us that we bring these stories to you. So this one standing out, again, says a lot. But we have learned in court today what's new in this indictment, and it has taken this case to yet another new level. So when we first told you about this story, Maris Nichols was facing 2 charges, and now she's facing 27. So let's do a quick refresher here of when this story first began. She was arrested early in May. So Maris Nichols worked as a biology teacher, and she was actually the head of the department at Alexander High School, which is in Douglasville, Georgia. It's about a half hour, a little more than that, outside of Atlanta. So she was first arrested on May 8th for allegedly having sex with a student in her classroom closet. She bonded out. She posted a $40,000 bond, but investigators kept digging, and it appears at this point that that was allegedly just the tip of the iceberg because more students came forward. There was a second arrest of Maris Nichols a little less than 2 weeks later on May 20th. Prosecutors say that she allegedly sent nude photos and videos to students. She's even accused of using a sex toy on live video calls with minors, and even allegedly showed explicit material to her own minor cousin. Now, after that second arrest on May 20th, her bond was set at $75,000, and she bonded out again. But this time she had strict conditions, and prosecutors say that she violated those conditions allegedly 85 times in 27 days. Now, the motion to revoke her bond was filed last week, but while that was still playing out, a grand jury was looking at this case, and on Wednesday, they handed down a massive indictment, which brings us to Nichols' appearance in court earlier this morning. The appearance was brief. It was via Zoom. She seemed to be in custody at a local jail. This was her first appearance since that indictment.
Ms. Mills, Ms. Nichols, because your attorney has indicated that you would like to waive the reading of the warrant, do you have any questions about your rights that I read to you just a moment ago?
Sir?
Then, Maris Nichols' attorney, a woman named Lauren Draper, addressed the judge.
Your Honor, this is an arrest based off of a grand jury indictment arrest warrant that Judge Wallace signed, and now that the case has been indicted by the grand jury, it's our understanding that it is now in the Superior Court's jurisdiction. So my client is aware of that. She is aware that Your Honor can only basically let her know what her rights are. We're waiving reading of the arrest warrant. We have a copy of it. So she understands that she's going to have to wait until she sees Judge Wallace, and we actually have a motion hearing scheduled for this Monday in front of Judge Wallace.
So let's get into what actually landed her back in court and back behind bars, according to this official indictment that was handed down by a grand jury in Douglas County, Georgia. So Maris Nichols is now facing 8 counts of sexual contact by an employee or agent in the first degree. And that is the charge for engaging allegedly in sexual intercourse or explicit sexual conduct with students she had authority over. And the alleged locations, frankly, are just as disturbing as the acts themselves. Prosecutors say that she had sex, allegedly, with a student in her classroom closet. Another incident allegedly took place in the backseat of a black Hummer, which she owns. And another was in the back of a student's truck at a golf course. 5 counts of sexual exploitation of children. And this charge, it's all significant, but this one's very significant as well. The indictment alleges that Nichols, quote, did knowingly assist in creating a video, a visual medium, depicting a minor engaged in sexual intercourse. 3 counts of cruelty to children in the first degree. Prosecutors say she maliciously inflicted cruel and excessive mental pain by exposing minors to sexually explicit conduct and material. Now, you will recall, earlier warrants mentioned a video of Nichols wearing a Jesus Loves You sweatshirt. Now, that video appears to be at the center of these charges. 3 counts of grooming a minor. Prosecutors say she engaged in a pattern of conduct over many months to allegedly prepare, persuade, and coerce these students to engage in sexual offenses. 4 counts of electronically furnishing obscene material to minors. She is accused of sending nude photographs of herself via electronic devices to her minor students, including videos of herself with sex toys. And one of those counts involves her own cousin, who's a minor. Now, she's also facing a count of child molestation, and that involves an immoral or indecent act with a child under the age of 16. 1 count of criminal attempt to commit tampering with evidence. And this one's crucial. Prosecutors say she directed one alleged victim to delete text messages and photographs from his phone to prevent her apprehension. An arrest warrant he obtained spells it out. Nichols told this alleged victim to, quote, delete everything off his phone and to lie if he was questioned about the crime of child molestation, of which he was the victim. 2 counts of criminal attempt to commit sexual contact by an employee or agent in the first degree, and the indictment alleges Nichols messaged or propositioned another student attempting to engage in sexual conduct with him. Now, there's one more detail in these documents that is worth noting. Throughout the investigation, detectives referenced claims that students may have been trying to blackmail Nichols by threatening to expose an alleged OnlyFans account in exchange for better grades. The indictment does not mention OnlyFans directly, but search warrants show investigators sought records from that platform, including account information and earnings data. Now, that part of the investigation is clearly ongoing. So, when you add all of it up, at this point, 27 counts, at least 7 alleged victims, incidents that allegedly happened at school, in her car, at a golf course, and even in her own home. And now, jail records show that she was booked into Douglas County Jail, and that is where she is being held without bond. But she is due back in court on Monday for another hearing, and that was originally scheduled to be a bond hearing after prosecutors brought up what they say was 85 times she allegedly violated her bond. We'll see what this means for this case going forward as this investigation is ongoing. Joining us now to talk more about another development in this case is Dan Shore, former sex crimes prosecutor. Always great to have you here on Law and Crime. You know, we unfortunately have talked about a lot of cases involving teachers who sexually abuse students or accused of sexually abusing students. Maris Nichols, though, I can't remember a time that we had so many alleged victims in a case. Just as someone who has prosecuted cases like this, like what sticks out to you about her at this point as a defendant in this case?
Sure. Well, obviously everyone's innocent until proven guilty, so we'll see what happens as the case proceeds, but it certainly seems like there are a lot of allegations against her involving many students involved in actual sexual interactions with some, or sexual material being sent to them through explicit photos, things like that. And it makes you wonder a few things. I mean, one, if it's so widespread, it seems like a very reckless thing to do, you know, even putting aside the morality problem of having sexual interactions with someone who's underage. Someone you think would recognize that eventually you're going to be caught if you're engaging in misconduct with so many people. And that seems to be what happened, because students talk, they're going to talk to each other. If someone's sharing explicit material with so many people engaging in sexual interactions, I think it's reasonable to think that eventually law enforcement, school authorities are going to find out, and they'll go to law enforcement. So it seems like, in addition to the morality and the criminal violations here and the traumatic effect it'll have on the students, it shows real recklessness and just a misunderstanding of the consequences of what she was doing, if all the allegations or even some of them were true.
Right, because and I think that's a good point too, because I was thinking when she was first arrested back like in the first week of May, she was accused of having sex with a student twice, and so there was one alleged victim. And I feel like in a lot of cases we talk about, like, we see people go to prison for a long time just facing that particular allegation. How does the fact and I know we're a long way away from any sort of punishment or anything like that, but when you have 7 victims, like we do in this case, allegedly, the number just went from 6 to 7. Like, what's the type of punishment she potentially could be looking at?
Well, you're looking at substantial prison time, because if someone's convicted with more than one victim, or even more than one count with the same victim, you can get either concurrent time. Concurrent time means you serve all the sentences together at the same time, or consecutive time, which means that if you get a certain prison sentence for each count with each victim, they can be one after another. And with child sex abuse cases, judges tend to give consecutive time. So if you're talking about 7 victims, and if she's convicted for all 7, a judge may give 7 different prison sentences that follow one after another. The feeling from judges, I think correctly, is if you did concurrently, it's almost like saying, well, if you are sexually exploiting one person, you can sexually exploit all the others without any additional consequence. So that's why consecutive time is even in those cases. So she could be facing decades in prison. A lot of these cases, most cases, are resolved via plea bargain. So we'll see what happens with that. She may be able to get some reduced sentence, but I can't imagine a plea avoiding some kind of incarceratory sentence based on the number of victims and the nature of the contact.
And it's just like the sheer volume that we're dealing with in this case, not just with the number of alleged victims, which is horrific, but then also she was granted bond twice. And over the course of 27 days, she's accused of violating that bond 85 times. What do you make of, first, she got a $40,000 bond when she was first arrested, and that was with one alleged victim. Then there were a total of 6 alleged victims. The second time, roughly a week, 2 weeks later, that she was arrested, and I believe it was a $75,000 bond. She was able to post that. I mean, before even getting into the violations, how common is it for someone to face these type of charges, even before that was still when she was only facing 13 charges, now it's 27, but even to that point, the fact that she was able to post bond twice, is that something that surprises you?
It doesn't surprise me, because usually judges, first of all, the bond, it's not inconsequential. It was a decently significant amount of money. It's not millions of dollars, but it is something. And judges generally are evaluating whether someone will appear in court, and when they're assessing what amount to give her for the bond. Is someone flight risk? Are they potentially going to run away? And if not, and if they don't have a criminal record, usually some bond is granted to people. You usually don't see someone held without a bond unless they are significant flight risk or extremely dangerous in a violent way. And often judges will say, okay, we'll set the bond, but we're going to have restrictions on where you go to try to mitigate any concern of you harming others while you're out pending a court case. That's why the violations of that bond condition are so serious, because judges give bonds to defendants with the hope that they're going to return to court and they're not going to be interacting with people that would be problematic. Here, she was restricted from going to a lot of locations where she might interact with underage people. She was restricted from engaging in any contact with children except her own child. And if she violated those conditions, then that is an extremely serious thing that judges do not like.
Yeah, she's expected to be in court on Monday, and that'll be for a bond hearing. We saw her at the appearance she had this morning after the grand jury indictment, where she's now facing 27 charges. But to have, you just see the number 85 times that somebody violates bond, and it's shocking. And then you see what she's accused of doing. Like, she goes to some retail stores, some fast food restaurants. Apparently she was not allowed to do that. How likely is it? Because, and I'm not defending her by any means, I want to be clear, but it's like she did not, to my understanding, she's not accused of contacting a witness. She's not accused of trying to intimidate a witness or any of that, but she certainly violated some of the conditions that were laid down. Like, how does the court look at that? If, I don't know if her defense could argue a misunderstanding, but knowing 85 times is a lot, but then at the same time, it's not like she was knocking, apparently, and I'm again not defending, but like, let's just say she wasn't like knocking on the door of an alleged victim in this case.
Right. Well, it may sound less serious because, she went to a store, she went to a fast food place, but the seriousness of that is that her conduct that she's alleged to have engaged in over a significant period of time is engaging with underage people in sexualized ways, both in person and through communication. So part of the point of those restrictions are that she couldn't go to places where she might be able to interact with other underage people, students, maybe either witnesses or former victims. So that's the seriousness of this, that the judge is saying, okay, you don't have to be in jail pending the court case, but you can't go to places where you might have the opportunity to interact. And she's not being monitored in terms of who she interacts with, so we really don't know. I can tell you from personal experience as a prosecutor and being in court a lot, judges do not like someone who violates their terms. Judges hate that. It's one thing for someone to break the law, but judges almost, real world, I think, is they take it personally. The judge says to someone, do not do this in court, and then they do that anyway. And usually there's a harsh consequence to that, and that harsh consequence may be revoking her bond. She may lose what she put up to the bond financially, and she may be in jail pending the rest of this case. I've seen that happen in other cases. Another alternative is to increase the amount of the bond. That could happen too.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens there. What do you make of just the timeline? I mean, how common is it in a case where, and we see it, I mean, it sometimes can, I'm not saying always, like feels like a throwaway line from law enforcement when they say the investigation's ongoing, and I know that there's still like work being done, but in this case, the number of victims, the number of charges, it seems to be updating daily. Like, how often is it that, okay, you make this arrest and then suddenly the door opens and you're finding more victims, and you're finding, especially at the pace at which this one seems to be going?
It is common in cases where there are a lot of victims, because it's very, very common for especially underage students, if they are involved in an inappropriate situation that's sexually explicit. Many of them don't want to go public. They're embarrassed. They're worried no one will believe them. Who will believe me as a teacher? They're worried about retaliation. So often, once one of these accounts is public, then other people feel emboldened to tell their story. So they may say, oh, okay, I was experiencing this too. Now I know it's safe to say that. On the flip side, sometimes you have people come out with stories that are not true because they've heard other people say they were victimized, and they think they might gain some benefit from also giving their story. So that's why law enforcement has to not just take every story at face value, but vet everyone individually. So if someone says, we had interactions, we had communication, they want to say, okay, what is the evidence of that communication? When did you interact? How did you interact? Who did you tell about it? So there is a lot of ongoing investigation in matters like this, but it's very common that one time someone reports something leads to many other people feeling emboldened to tell their story that they did before.
It seems like there's some digital evidence, allegedly in this case, that prosecutors have, including some very incriminating videos that she allegedly sent to students. Mm-hmm. I feel like in other cases we've seen, it's sometimes, we'll see a child sex abuse material charge because you have the victim allegedly sending a video to, the suspect, the defendant. In this case, it's her allegedly sending videos to the students. Just what do you make of, it doesn't seem like, if all of this is true, it feels like a story that was kind of hiding in plain sight because things were just being sent out from her to so many people, if all of this is true.
Right, and there's a lot of cases that tragically with sex abuse in hindsight, we say, oh, it was really hiding in plain sight, that people knew about it, people were talking about it, people had information, but people are often reticent to report these things, to go to authorities, either because of mistrust of authorities or a feeling of it's going to be misplaced self-blame, there's retaliation. So we do see that a lot, unfortunately, where people don't go public. But as I was saying before, from her perspective, she should have recognized that if it's true that she was interacting in these sexually explicit ways with so many underage students, that eventually someone's going to report it. It's just not realistic to think that so many people would keep this as a secret just forever. And that was very reckless on her part. I'm sure there's mental health considerations that are at issue that don't necessarily mitigate the seriousness of what she did, but this is obviously not a well-adjusted person who does something like this.
Yeah, how does mental health factor into this? Because clearly you look at the allegations, you look at just how brazen she was in allegedly violating the terms of her condition, really not caring one way or another. You look at it and you say to yourself, something is wrong with this person if all of this is true. But then at the same time, we see in certain other crimes where there's an insanity defense. How does mental health factor into how these cases are prosecuted?
Sure. Well, with Insanity defense is the core of an insanity defense is that you don't know and appreciate what you're doing at the time. So that cannot be used generally in a sex abuse case, because if someone's engaging in sexual interaction, sending a very explicit, specific photo, video, having sex, the person's aware of what they're doing. Insanity, the classic insanity defense example in law school is someone chokes someone to death and thinks they're squeezing an orange. They don't recognize what they're doing. So that's not going to be successful here. In terms of mental health, I would say anyone engaging in sexual interactions with someone who's underage has mental health issues, and that doesn't mitigate what they did. Maybe they can make an argument for sentencing to mitigate the sentence they get, but in terms of the elements of the crimes that they're accused of violating, it really is not going to help them.
And then when it comes to this OnlyFans, and it's unclear whether that's true, the recent indictment doesn't mention it, but there was a story that came out and the local media kind of focused on it in Atlanta because a search warrant had mentioned that she allegedly had an OnlyFans, and you had students that actually knew about it, and then they were using it as leverage and almost blackmail against her. Is that something that could be a mitigating factor that the defense could use? That, like, yes, she is accused of doing all these terrible things to students. And again, this isn't an argument I'm making, but it's one where you look at where the defense could argue whatever situation she was in, she was the victim of this blackmail plot by students at the school.
Well, first of all, that is a really serious charge. And if students were doing that, if they were trying to blackmail her, then law enforcement should prosecute those students for doing that. That's absolutely a serious criminal offense. And on the flip side of that, for her, I don't see it as a mitigating factor at all. Certainly, she would be that victim in a separate prosecution. It's a serious prosecution, but in terms of whether it mitigates the fact that she was engaging in wrongful acts, that doesn't help her in a criminal defense. Maybe she gets some sympathy from a jury. Maybe some judge will feel sympathetic and give her a little bit of a lighter sentence, but it doesn't change the fact that if she did engage in sexual interactions with underage people, having been blackmailed about that is not going to help her. This is serious and it should be prosecuted separately.
And then just lastly, and this is a question I ask you each time, Dan, or just kind of a topic I bring up, because you do see the comments, especially in a case like this, where the headline has OnlyFans. I think she's also accused of encouraging a student to watch 50 Shades of Grey. She's having sex allegedly with a student in a Hummer, in a golf course, like all of this. And there's kind of this like high five culture that you're seeing in the comments that surround this story, because it is so salacious in a lot of ways. But what is the long-lasting impact you can see for, and in some of these cases, I mean, some of the alleged victims are under the age of 16 years old. Not that people who are victims of sex abuse who are older, don't have trauma as well, but these are very, very young children who have been allegedly victims of this teacher.
Right, and there is a heightened consequence in someone who is underage. As you said, adults definitely have traumatic trauma from sex abuse the rest of their lives. But when someone's underage and they haven't formulated their own being in terms of understanding relationships and sexual interactions, and this is a formative experience for them about interacting with someone in that way, and that really can just stunt them from growing for the rest of their life in terms of how they do have relationships, both sexual and non-sexual. I've seen that in the accounts of many adults who were sexually abused as children, how they were never able to have a healthy development the way most people do, to learn about these things and interact with people. And that is across gender lines. So as you alluded to before, a lot of people think, oh, well, it's a teacher who's a female, or it's an employee of a school who's a female. It's underage students who are male. And then people say, oh, I wish that happened to me when I was a teenager. And I think that's really missing the point that it is traumatic. They are victims too. And that attitude is changing. I've been doing this for a long time, and definitely I think society has evolved and seen these boys as victims too. You don't have to be just female to be sexually abused and have traumatic impact, unfortunately. We see that in many boys and men too.
Yeah, it's just a really tough case. We'll see what happens next. I mean, again, she's going to be in court on Monday. We'll see if I believe she's in custody right now, but what long-term things look like for her related to bond and the charges she faces. Dan Shore, former sex crimes prosecutor. Always great to have you on Long Crime. You write about these issues as well. Where can people find your work?
Sure. So my latest novel is called Open Bar, and it is about sex abuse of underage people at a school. People can find that anywhere books are sold, and they can find me on Substack.
All right, Dan, appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're also streaming on Peacock. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.